Now my friends, I think I have finally nailed the golden recipe for the perfect tiered dress.
Hey, what you up to?
Deja vu had me thinking of you. For the past is the past, glad that it's so news. Riding around on your board with your angst and your issues, I guess they...
Well, hello and welcome back to the Essentials Club. If you are new around here, I am Maddie, and today we are jumping into how to make a gathered tiered dress. You might have seen on my channel before, we have made dresses that have similar titles to this, but why this one stands out, first of all, it has a double way of wearing it. So I've created this split section up the top here where it ties up with two straps, and you could wear this at the front as I am today, or you could also wear it at the back, which makes the section that I have in the back at the moment the front. And unlike any of the dresses that I have made before, this one includes pockets, which I know has been a massive request, and finally I'm getting to it. It has these balloon gathered sleeves and can easily be adapted to be a mini or a midi style. And as you can see today, I'm wearing it paired with a turtleneck later because it is quite freezing here at the moment, but I think this will also thrive in warmer climates in summer, especially because it is nice and flowy and it won't touch your body when you're all sweaty. As you know, we are all about a versatile number around here, being able to wear it through all the varying seasons of the year. Essentially, she is a dream to have in any wardrobe, and if you want to add it to yours, this is what you'll need. For the fabric, I will put the suggested amount per size in the description box below this video. This will be based on a midi style, and you do need quite a lot of material just because it is a gathered number, and therefore you need a lot of excess material to fit in there. This one is, I believe, like a cotton. It's kind of got a little bit of a light flannelette feeling to it. It was an old fitted bed sheet that we no longer use, and of course I couldn't let it go to waste, so here it is in a dress form. If you're out searching for a material for this project, I would suggest something nice and like lightweight, like a linen, a cotton, as that will give it the best gathered effect and will just obviously sit nicer as well. You'll then also need some pins, a safety pin, some fabric chalk, some fabric scissors, clean paintbrush or something long and thin that we can use to push out the straps when it comes to that step. We'll need some elastic for the bottom of these sleeves. My elastic is about 1/2 inch wide, and to figure out how much you'll need, measure this arm area not too tight and add a few extra inches of seam allowance, and then make sure you have enough for each arm. And then we'll just need a shirt to reference, ideally something that fits you not too tight, and that can be our reference garment that we will then trace to create the pattern for this top bit and then kind of map it out from there. And then lastly, we will just need our trusty old sewing machine, and then we are ready to jump into making this dress. But before we do that, I just want to say a massive thank you to the sponsor of today's video, which is Skillshare. I have partnered with them many times, and it's definitely won't be the last that you will hear of them. I've personally loved using Skillshare's online platform to dive into old and new areas of interest to help level up my knowledge and my skill set. And lately I've been trying not to get too comfortable or stagnant in my own profession. I feel there's always room to improve and keep my passion for graphic design forever evolving. So when I discovered one of my design icons, Paula Scher, had a course available on Skillshare, I could not wait to get stuck into it. I really enjoyed getting the insight into how she approaches design and running an agency. It got me really excited to implement her tips into my own design business. I love the variety of the presenters and the interest that you can find on Skillshare, and they're just making all of their secrets available for us to easily access. If you're curious, creative, or just generally bored and want to learn something new, I would highly recommend joining the Skillshare community. And to help you easily do this, Skillshare have created an offer where the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can start exploring your creativity today. So make sure you jump on that offer while it lasts. Now it's time to jump into the steps of making this beautiful dress. So let's lay down our main bit of material and then lay down our reference shirt on top of this. You might want to try it on the shirt and figure out the point where you want the ruffle to start. So for me, I wanted this first gathered tier to start kind of just under where my bra sits. So once you have personally figured that area where you would like the first gathered tier to start, maybe pop a pin on the shirt there, so when you are cutting out the pattern around it, you have that referenced out. We will then just tuck the sleeves inward, so we are just focusing on this like chest area. And if you're happy with the size of this shirt, I would recommend maybe just adding about 1/2 inch seam allowance to all edges. If it is a bit of a tight fit and you want it to be looser, probably maybe add 1 to 2 inches. If it's quite an oversized fit, you can kind of just trace exactly where it is. So once you've figured out your seam allowance, we will then just trace around the shirt with that. I personally just traced half of it, cut it out, and then folded that so it is nice and symmetrical. symmetrical. Then that is our main top section done. Then for the other side, we're going to create 2 pieces as we are adding this split section in. That first piece that we cut out, fold that in half, and we're going to use that as a template. Lay it down on top of your material. We'll just trace exactly where this is, except for this main straight section where we will add an extra inch seam allowance. Once you've cut out that first half, you can then use that as a template for the second half. Just make sure when you are cutting this second piece out that you've laid down the material good sides facing so they're mirroring each other. So then now we should have that main 1 panel and then the 2 matching panels, so 3 panels all up. Then either out of this same material or another material that you might have laying around, we're going to cut out some lining or facing, whatever you might call it. I'm just going to call it facing throughout this, where it's pretty much a layer that it'll prevent it from going see-through because we are doubling it up, but it also will help create clean lines around this neck and center section, and meaning we don't need to hem it later on. So we'll use these 3 pieces as templates and just trace and cut out a matching piece for each. So that means we should have 3 panels and also the facing for each of them. Then just going to focus on joining the main panel and its facing. So we'll focus on the 1 main top panel first and lay them good sides facing, and we're just going to sew 1 simple line across this neck area. You can pin that in place or just go straight for it, whatever you feel comfortable doing. Once you've sewn that line, we're just going to put a few cut marks in that curved area, and that will just help it kind of separate and ease the curve of it, so when we do flip it around, it doesn't pucker up as much and it allows more of a curved stretch to the material. For a curve like this, I tend to do it every couple of inches. I don't know if there is a method or a rule behind this. If you know of a particular amount of space that we're meant to leave between it, leave it in the comments below. Always up for learning new things. Before we join the facing and the main panels of this split section, we're going to create the straps so we can add them in. So cut out 4 pieces, which are about 1 inch wide by 12 inches long, or otherwise about 3 centimeters by 30 centimeters long. We're then just going to fold them so the good sides are facing, sew down 1 short side and then down 1 long side as close as we can to the raw edge, and leave that other short edge opened. I found when I was using this material, it really wanted to fray on me, so I did go around and end up zigzag stitching the edges of this before I folded the good sides out, just to help prevent it from unraveling from the inside. If you find that your material is quite susceptible to fraying, then I would recommend overlocking or zigzag stitching these edges as well. Once you've done that, we will grab our clean paintbrush or whatever you had laying around that was nice and long and thin, and we're going to place the tip of it on the edge that we sewed close and kind of shuffle around the material until we get a bit of a break, and we can begin to push this material until it reveals itself out the other end, and continue to pull the good sides out so that we have 1 strap all ready to go. Repeat that process for the other 3 remaining straps, so 1 short edge, 1 long edge, prevent it from fraying if need be, and then flip the good sides outwards. Then we're going to begin the sandwiching process of putting these straps in between the facing and the main material. So lay down your main material with the good sides facing up, and then grab your straps, and I place my top one about 1/2 inch from the top, and then the second one pretty much halfway between the top and bottom, and the edges that we are aligning here are the raw edges, as they will get hidden in between the seams, and we want those clean edges that are all closed up hanging outwards. Once you're happy with the placement of that, we will then put the lining or the facing back on top of that, and that has to be good sides facing to the good sides of the main material. And it's a bit of a sandwiching process where there is the main panel, the straps, and then the facing on top of that, and it's all good sides facing each other. Then pin in some key places so it doesn't move around while you're sewing it. That would be a few of the edges as well as the straps where they are placed so they don't move. And then we're just going to sew the curve of the lined neck and then down that straight center section, leaving all the other edges open. Again, before we flip it good sides facing out, we'll just chop a few marks in that curved area. Just note, obviously, when we are cutting here, we are not cutting open the line that we have just sewn. It is just kind of in that seam allowance section. Again, as well, if you find that you have a material that is particularly going to fray, before flipping any of these edges out, it is a good time to overlock it or zigzag stitch it, just to prevent it from unraveling underneath, of course. So we will then flip that so the good sides reveal, and then we'll go back to our other panels and repeat the same process where we lay the main panel good side facing up, place the straps where we would like them to sit, and then sandwich the facing on top of that with the good sides facing, sew along the curved area of the neck and then down the center, trim those little edges of the curved area in the seam allowance section, and then flip it good sides facing out. Now, if you're not lazy like me, this might be a good point to iron it flat just so it stays in place. There is a step in the next section where we can add some top stitching to it, so I'll talk you through that if you prefer to add top stitching in these sections so that they sit flat. I actually like it when there is no sewing line there, but again, down to personal preference. That is the beauty of sewing your own garments. You can add the the details that you like. Perfect, so we should have the 2 split sections ready to go and also the single top panel as well. We're going to lay the single top panel good side facing up and then one of the split sections good sides facing down, and we're going to match the shoulder edge and also the underarm edge and leave all the other areas open. You can then pin them in place and then sew a single line across there so that they join. I just tucked away that first side so that it was out of the way, and then I just repeated the process for the second split where I laid it down good sides facing, pinned that top shoulder section, pinned that side section and sewed along those 2 edges. Then you can tie up that center section and you have like a cute little cropped tank top looking thing. Adding the sleeves. So lay down your front panel that we have just finished and we are going to measure the height of the general sleeve area, so kind of from the top shoulder down to where that armhole visually stops. Now for this detail you can adjust it as you would like. I wanted quite a puffy sleeve effect, so to this height I ended up adding 4 inches, and that will be enough for the seam allowance as well as just a little bit of extra height so that I can gather it up. As you can see, it's not too gathered where the sleeve actually joins the armhole, but more so just gathered down here. 4 inches of obviously looking like this. If you go more, it'll give more of a bunched up effect. Once you've figured that out, add your extra seam allowance. That is going to be the final height of the sleeve, but the panel that we end up cutting out is double that height. So whatever measurement you found, double that and write that down as the cutting height. And then to find the length of the sleeve, we will just measure from our top shoulder down to where we would like it to finish. I went for kind of like a mid-arm length, and then we're just going to add 3 inches of seam allowance. And if you're working with that 1/2 inch width elastic, that should be enough to create a hem that is wide enough to hide the elastic in there. So then we will grab our material and plot out a rectangle, which is that double height and that length plus the seam allowance that we figured out. Cut out that first rectangle and then you can use that as a template to cut out the second one. Then we'll just fold the sleeve so we are focusing back on that height. Then we're going to lay our partially finished top section over the top of this sleeve area, aligning the top shoulder corner with the folded edge, as that is going to be the top of the sleeve, and push it over as far as you can to the edge, as we want the sleeve to be the maximum length that we measured. We're then just going to trace around this armhole curve and keep extending that trajectory of the curve to the very edge down the bottom, as that will be the extra height that we then gather up. You can then unfold the sleeve, and this curved edge that we have just cut out, we are going to sew a single line across there that will help us gather it up to then add onto the armhole. To do this, I would recommend switching your machine to a longer stitch and also a looser tension. That will just give us the ability to easily gather it up later. Then when we sew this line, stay as close as you can to the curved edge, as well as do not backstitch at the beginning or the end, as we need the threads to be loose. So sew that line, and then we can focus on one of the edges that we started or finished it at and grab one of the threads and then just simply pull the material over the top of that thread, and that will help us gather it to the point where it matches the height of this armhole. You can even lay the garment down next to this sleeve, and that will just help us map out the amount that we need to gather it up. Once you're happy with how that is all looking and hopefully it matches the height of the sleeve to the armhole, you can then begin pinning it on there. Flip it over so the sleeve is now laying mainly on top of the garment, and we're going to match the top edge of the armhole with the top edge of the sleeve so that they are laying good sides facing on each other, and just begin to pin the sleeve so it is going all around the armhole from the top to the underarm section and again down the other side, making sure at least you've got like a 1/2 inch minimum seam allowance on the underarm section where we will end up joining it together. You will notice that they kind of naturally want to try and curving away from each other, so bit by bit you're kind of going to need to align these edges. You even might need to do a little bit of shuffling of the gathering so it all fits on there how you'd like it to. We then just sew one line from the underarm section all the way around back to pretty much where we started. Then we pretty much have the sleeve attached. We just need to do one final thing where you'll notice that the bottom section of the sleeve is still open, so we'll flip it all inside out with the good sides facing, and we will sew one single line from this underarm section out to the very edge of this sleeve, joining that bottom section together. Once you've done that, that means that our first sleeve is all completed, and we just need to repeat this process for the second sleeve. So again, lay down the top panel on top of the sleeve and map out that curved edge, trim that area, and then sew a single line across there, which we will then gather to then match the height of the armhole section. Once you're happy with the placement of that, align the top shoulder edge and the top of the sleeve, pin them with the good sides facing all the way around this armhole area, and again leaving at least a 1/2 inch seam allowance down the bottom. Sew this in place and then flip it all inside out so you are focusing on the bottom section of the sleeve and sew that closed.
My mama don't play like
Then we switch our focus to where we add the elastic in to give it that gathered effect. So we're just going to create a single hem first, which I would recommend doing it as small as you can, say 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 inch. Fold that first one, pin it in place, and then sew all around there. But then we're going to create a second fold, but this one needs to be wide enough for the elastic to fit in there. First, let's cut out the elastic for the area. So measure your arm where your sleeve is going to finish. I'd recommend measuring it so it's not too tight. It has a bit of a wiggle room, but whatever you think you're going to feel comfortable, measure it at that. And then we're going to add 1 inch for seam allowance. Cut out your first piece to this measurement and then just replicate it for a second piece. So what I would recommend is just laying it down, creating the second fold, and then just kind of laying the elastic on top of there. And that will help us map out if it is wide enough, make any adjustments if need be. Just make sure that whatever the width of the elastic, you've at least got like an extra 1/4 of an inch fold so that you have enough space to sew a line on there. And once you're happy with the width of the second hem, pin it in place, and we're just going to sew a singular line all around here, stopping about 2 inches from where we started. And that's just going to allow access for us to put the elastic in there. Once you've sewn around to this point, we will grab the elastic, pop a safety pin on one end and insert it through this hole, just kind of pushing and gathering until we reach the other side. Just make sure as you're doing this that the other tail end doesn't get sucked into this hem, as we need them to match up eventually. You can then overlap these ends with that seam allowance that we allowed. Just make sure that before you do this that the elastic is all nice and straight, because you don't accidentally want to have a twisted elastic, just because that would be a little bit annoying. Switch your machine to a zigzag setting. Do a couple of stitch forwards and back stitches, and that should hopefully secure that so it is nice and tight and not going to come undone. Then just pull it so it all gets hidden in that hem area, and then we're just going to switch our machine back to a regular stitch and then just sew close that little hole that we left open, and that is the end of our sleeve all done. You'll then just need to repeat that process for the second end of the sleeve, and then we essentially have this like cute gathered sleeve crop top, which we are then just going to begin adding the gathered sections onto. So lay down this top section that we have just created, and we're going to measure the width of this bottom area, as that is what we are going to add the gathered panel onto. My width was 22 inches of one side of the top, and I want this first panel to be quite gathered, so I'm going to double that, which means one of my panels is going to be 44 inches wide. A little secret that I do is I always do this top one the most gathered, so I'm going to double the width, and then for the rest of them I end up only doing 1.5, just because I feel like the wider they get, then the more percentage is being gathered in. And then to figure out our height, this is where you need to calculate your final length and divide that by how many panels you're going to be adding on. We're then going to add 2 inches of seam allowance. Measure from where the bottom of this top section will sit down to where you want the final dress to finish on your body. You might notice that my dress has not equal panels, and I just decided kind of as I was cutting it that I'm going to make each panel 2 inches difference, so I just kind of calculated what that ended up being. The creative freedom is all yours and how you want it to finally look. So long story short, one of my panels for this first gathered section is going to be 44 inches wide by 15 inches high. I measured and cut out 2 panels at these measurements. Because this section is going to be the most accessible, this is where I'm actually going to add the pockets into. You can either use your same material that you're using for the outside, or like me, you can use a different material that you'll be using for the pockets. I just found using my hand as a reference for the shape is probably the best, because it's your hand that's going in there that you want to fit in there. You'll notice that on pockets they're kind of like a weird jelly bean look, but without the end of it. The top section needs to be wide enough for my hand to obviously go in. Measure your height of your hand and then at least add like 3 inches, so that is enough seam allowance plus just that little bit of extra room so it can get in and out. That is going to be the straight edge height. That bottom section you kind of want to be, again, at least like long enough or wide enough for your hand to go in, or even long enough for your phone to go in. I don't know what you'll be putting in there. Essentially from that straight edge, which allows our hand to go in, it'll go straight out, kind of curve down and around, and then back up. Cut out that first one, and then you can use that as a template to cut out the second one. Make sure that you have these either good sides or bad sides facing so that the shapes are mirroring each other. You will then need to cut out another 2 of these shapes, again making sure that they mirror each other, and then it is time to add these pockets into the side seams. To do this, we are going to separate the main panels, and we're going to separate the 2 matching pockets, and we will lay them down good sides facing onto the main panels. I just found it easiest to kind of center that straight edge onto the height of the panel. Once you're happy with the placement of that, pin it in place. If you're worried about them not matching up, I just measured that the height between the top of the pocket and the top of the panel was the same on both of the pieces. They need to be a mirrored version of each other. So when you end up joining it, they end up facing each other. And then just sew one line to secure those pockets onto the main panel. Start and end at least 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter from the edges of the pocket, and that will just allow us the seam allowance that we need for later on when we join the edges of the pockets together. We're then just going to fold the pocket away and then tuck that seam so it is sitting on the pocket, and we're just going to do a top stitch along there so it holds down the pocket onto this seam, so that when it is sitting here like this, it isn't just kind of like bunching out and falling out and you see the pocket, whereas it kind of like holds it in place. Tuck the seam under the pocket and sew a top stitch along there, making sure to leave that 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance from the edges of the pocket. Repeat the process for the second pocket, and then we are up to joining the seams and the pockets together. Lay the good sides of the main panels together, and the pockets at this point will be folded outwards and away, and we'll lay the good sides of the pockets together as well. Once you're happy with the alignment of all of that, pin it in place. We're going to sew the edge above and below the pocket of these side seams, and then we'll end up sewing the pocket together as well. You can do this separately, do like the top line, the bottom line, and then the pocket, but I also found you could just do it all in one go. I just sewed from the top to the pocket edge, did a back stitch just so it was nice and secure, and then turned the corner, went around the pocket, again just did a back stitch before I turned the corner, and then went back down from the pocket to the bottom edge. It just saves time sometimes doing it all in one go, or if you feel more confident doing it in separate parts, that is all good. We'll then just need to repeat the process for the second side, which has the other pockets and the other side seam. Obviously now it is all joined together already on one side, so lay the good side of the pocket and the good side of the main panel facing, the good side of the pocket and the good side of the main panel facing on the other side as well. You'll just need to double check a few things here to make sure that it is all aligning. Make sure that the new pocket sections that we are adding are mirroring each other, as well as the bottom sections of the pocket are facing the same way as the bottom sections of the other pocket, because you don't want one pocket going up and one going down. Double check all those details. Then again, just sew one line across these pockets, securing them in place, making sure to stop 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch from those edges. Flip them outwards and tuck the seam under the pocket and do a top stitch across there. We'll then push the pocket pieces to the outer edges, lay the good sides of the main panels facing and the good sides of the pocket facing, sew the seams above and below the pocket, and then also the edges of the pockets. So now the pockets are all in there. That helps us indicate which will be the top side and the bottom side of this edge. The bottom side is obviously where the pockets kind of hang down to. We're going to do the same process that we did for the sleeve, where we just sew one line around this whole top section, making sure that it is on a looser tension and a wider stitch, and we do not back stitch at the beginning or the end as we need to gather the material. So sew one line around there, again staying as close as you can to this raw top edge. Grab your 2 threads on one of the ends and begin to gather it up until it meets the final width that we want it to be, which was about 44 inches for me, or you can just align it with the top until it pretty much reaches that width. We're then just going to do one more step before we add this panel onto the top, and that is this front split section is obviously separated at the moment, and I just find like you could sew it all together at this point, but I just feel like it might be a bit annoying if it stays separated. So what I did is at the seam where the main panel and the facing met, I aligned the good sides of each of the splits and just kind of sewed for about 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter, just so that they are joined. So the bottom creates one consistent line. Just a little thing that's going to make our life a bit easier. At the next step, we are then going to begin laying the good sides of the gathered panel aligned to the good sides of this top panel, and ideally we would just pin in the 2 side seams first so we know that they're all matching, and then we can do any adjustments to the gathering to fill in this middle section and add some pins in along there. We are then just going to sew a line all around there, joining these 2 panels together. If you're confused about where to sew at this point, you want the gathered line to be in the seam allowance section. So say if our raw edge is on the right, we are sewing to the left of that gathered line. Once you finish sewing that line, you can see that we have this kind of like cute, very mini dress or elongated top with this first gathered panel joined. We then just pretty much repeat that process, but it is a little bit easier because we're not adding the pockets. Each layer means that it gets wider. So if the width of this panel was 44 inches, I want my new panel to be 1.5 times that amount. I want this next panel to be 66 inches wide by whatever height I determined. I think it ended up being 12 inches high. I cut out 2 panels. You can see that I had to lay it on the ground at this point because it got very wide. You can kind of see that I'm working with some awkward angles here just because I'm trying to map out the measurements within the confinements of the weird shapes this blanket allowed me to use. Once I'd cut out those 2 panels, I then just laid them good sides facing, sewed down the 2 side edges so that we joined it to make one big panel, and then again just switched my machine to the wider stitch, the looser tension, and sewed one single line, not back stitching at the end of the beginning, all the way around at the top section as close as I can to that raw edge. Focused on the threads at one side and pushed the material along there so it gave it that gathered effect until it reached the width of the panel that I will be adding it onto, and then laid them on top of each other so they were good sides facing, matched the 2 side seams, popped a pin in there, and then again just made any adjustments to the gatherings so that the width matched, popped some more pins in there so it held it in place, sewed a single line all the way around there so it adds this new layer onto the tiered dress, and then I ended up with a kind of mini dress. I almost stopped at this point because I thought it was really cute, but I do have a mini style dress like this already, and my goal is to make a midi length dress. You might also get to this next layer and realize that it is getting very wide, and it is kind of rare to have that amount of material laying around. My panel that I'm adding onto is 66 inches wide, and my new panel needs to be 99 inches. My tape measure doesn't even go that far. I then doubled that, which is 198, which is what the whole joint panel would end up being, and I divided that by 3 because it was more achievable to cut out 3 panels at 66 than it was to cut out 2 panels at 99, just based on the amount of material that I had left. It does mean that there will be a random seam somewhere down the bottom, but because it is gathered, I found you can't even see where the seams are, down to personal preference and what you have available. But essentially we need to cut out enough width that is 1.5 times the size above it so that it can gather down to fit on there, and then we need to figure out the height, which again, I'm not sure what you went with. This one I think ended up being 8 inches because it ended up being smaller than the one above it. Cut out the panels relevant to that, joined them all at the side seams with the good sides facing until it made one big giant panel, absolutely massive at this point. Sewed that line across the top edge, then used this line of stitching to gather it down to the point where it matched the width of the panel above it so that I could join it on, lay them good sides facing, and at least put 2 pins on either end though, and then you can kind of again match up the gathering if need be, make any adjustments. So that final line across this top edge, honestly I think the original footage of me sewing this line ends up taking about 15 minutes. So to the person who commented that I fast forward my videos, like would you rather me put 15 minutes of me sewing one single line in there? So once I got to the end of that, I had a finished dress. Essentially, at this point I would probably recommend trying it on. Just make sure that the length is either where you want it to be, or if it's too long you can figure out how much you need to take up, or if it's kind of where you want it to be, then you can map out how to make a final hem that doesn't take away too much length. So we will then focus on this bottom edge. If you found that you have quite a bit of extra length there, then you can do a hem that is a full double fold, and depending how much length you have, you can figure out how much you can fold into this hem. Ideally I reckon like 1/2 inch each fold is a healthy amount if you can do that. Otherwise, if you're like me, you can overlock or zigzag stitch this bottom edge and then just do a single fold that is as small as you can get it to be. Pin this whole area in place and then sew a single line, and that is the final structured sewing piece we need to do. All those gathered tiers that we added on are currently fraying, as you might have seen in my footage, so I just went back and trimmed the excess material off of those points and then zigzag stitched around the edges, just because if you want to wash this number or wear it for years to come, it will prevent it from falling apart, which is pretty much the goal. We don't want this dress to fall apart. We just spent probably a day making it. Well, this number is ready to add to my wardrobe. I can wear it with this cute tie number at the front or wear it on the back, and the best thing of all, it has pockets. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it all made sense. If you did like it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe, as I've got plenty more videos in the works like this. Also, a massive thank you to Skillshare as well for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to jump on the offer, which is in the description box of this video. Remember, it's limited to the first 1,000 people, so get amongst it. Wherever you are, I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you guys in my upcoming videos.